Tonight's speaker is Kevin Windsor, the Executive Director of the National Air Force Museum of Canada in Trenton, Ontario. Kevin took on that role in 2018. Prior to that, he was the museum's curator for 6 years. He's also worked as a curator of the Niagara Falls History Museum in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Windsor.
Okay, so this is the National Air Force Museum of Canada on a nice, warm, sunny day, taken from a hot air balloon, which is sitting up at about 50 feet. We're offering hot air balloon rides at the last Quinte International Air Show. Now, I know one of the questions after this will be, are we having a Quinte International Air Show for 2024? And the answer right now is maybe. We are not sure if it's happening here at A-Wing Trenton. So we'll keep you all posted as it develops. So for those of you who've never been to the museum, we're located at 220 RCAF Road at 8-Wing Trenton, which is on the northwest side of the base. Our mission is to preserve the history of Canada's Air Force, or Canada's Air Forces, through the collection, protection, preservation, and display of related artifacts, publication, documents, works of art, in memory of those who have given their lives in service of Canada. So here we have 3 pictures of Lancaster KB882, our Lancaster that we're restoring right now. One in 1945, one in about 1955, one in 64. It's the very last flight heading over Edmundston, New Brunswick. So it was built in November of 1944. As most of you all know, Victory Aircraft in Malton. When it was sent to the UK in March of 1945, it was taken on strength with 428 Squadron with the code of NAR. Now, early on in the beginning, we had some confusion over what the squadron code was. So we knew it was NAR, but we weren't sure if it was R for Rabbit or R for Roger. And we had seen that in both in different publications naming that aircraft as Rabbit or Roger. But we did find a photograph here from 428 Squadron that is R for Roger with the skull and crossbones there. And we're looking at having that reproduced so that we can display that, because as you're probably all aware, the aircraft will be restored to its Mark 10 AR configuration, so from 1964. So it will be a post-war Lancaster. So during its time with 428 Squadron, it flew 11 missions. Those are the missions that are there below, and we've started putting together quite a bit of information on the missions that it flew. Some of the notable ones. Sorry, I'm just going through my notes here. March 31st, 1945, to the Blom and the Voss shipyards that were there. They were attacked. Deputy Gaggle Leader, as he was called, mentioned that they were attacked by ME 263s. So we've been trying to put together some of the information of what's been happening for each of these missions that were there. Further on down in his notes, he calls them 262s, and he says 5 Lancs were lost, but we knocked out 4 ME 262s for certain, 3 more probable, and 4 damaged. This first large-scale enemy interception of our bombers in daylight showed that the contest was by no means one-sided, even when Jerry had the advantage of jet-propelled fighters. So one of the benefits is we have a large collection of logbooks at the museum, and we do have the logbook of Flying Officer Ross, who was one of the crews from 428 Squadron in the Second World War who flew on KB882. April 4th and 5th at Meersburg, Germany, for the oil refinery. They were attacked by ME 410s, and we do have an account of what Ross mentions when that happened as well. So again, some quite a great deal of information that we've been putting together. We've been cross-referencing this with other captains of air maps that we have in the collection from other squadrons that took part in the operations that night, many of them going on the same mission. And we've been putting together quite a good collection of research about these 11 missions and what happened after the war. So again, VE Day on the 8th of May, 1945, KB882 selected for Tiger Force. They took some of the new low-time Lancasters and were to bring them back for the planned bombing of Japan. 1945. I'll head back to the overseas journey from the 1st of June 1945 from Middleton to Cornwall, and they were carrying passengers back and forth as well. So each of the different stops, they would pick up a passenger and they would bring that down. Transatlantic flight leaving the Azores on the 6th of June and arriving in Newfoundland on the 10th of June. And again, there's a picture of its early service as a Mark 10 AR. So KB882 served with distinction with 408 Squadron, which was based out of Rockcliffe in Ottawa. And in 1964, it was sold to the city of Edmundston. Now we've been looking through the 408 Squadron operations records books to find many of the flights that KB882 went on, and we found some fairly neat flights. They took part of the Apex rocket exercise with KB976 in Thule. Then April 25th, 1958, Lancaster KB882 US at Frobisher Bay. And this is becoming quite a problem. So in the 1958 annual report of the squadron, they mentioned the greatest handicap to fulfilling the squadron's basic role has been the aircraft itself. The Lancaster aircraft lacks the range, speed, altitude, and internal space required to exploit the equipment it carries. In addition, the aircraft is fast reaching the post where it is uneconomical to maintain. It has become a rare operation for the Lancaster to depart on a northern flight and return to base without encountering unserviceabilities someplace en route, which require spare parts to be dispatched from Rockcliffe. So even in 1958, the Lancaster is getting quite past its prime. Again, more Apex rocket photo reconnaissance up through the north. It took part in the Canadian International Air Show in September of 1959. So all of this is part of the operations record book, which we included in the museum exhibit, which is being developed. So in 26th of May, 1964, it was sold to the city of Edmundston, where it lived as a monument to those who served in the Second World War. In November of 2016, the city of Edmundston agreed to transfer ownership to the National Air Force Museum of Canada. Now, as many of you are aware, it was supposed to go to Edmonton, Alberta before that. And then we received permission in 2016. 2017, I flew to Edmundston to the airport for a formal transfer ceremony. And then in October of 2017, we started bringing it back to the museum after 1 month of taking it apart. So when it arrived at the museum, we had 7 truckloads full of Lancaster. And you can imagine the sight when you're driving down the 401 and you get past or you pass a Lancaster bomber on a truck. So there was 7 trucks that were carrying all the parts in total. And these are just some of the pictures of how we managed to bring it back to the museum. There was a little bit of damage to the Lancaster. It was stuck in the ground. We had to use a crane to pull it off, and that ended up crushing some of the under the bay doors. But again, with our restoration crew and what they're able to do, that was pretty minimal damage. Again, so the center spar section was turned sideways, put onto the aircraft, and then brought to the museum. The engines those were brought on one flatbed truck. So one of the first things that we do when the aircraft comes in is we look for anything of historical significance that's inside the aircraft. So in our initial assessment, we found this panel, which was in the back section. We'll see where it was. And scratched into that is Flying Officer Ferguson. Now, again, going through our collection of logbooks, we do have the logbook of Ross, who was part of KB882 in 428 Squadron, and part of his crew was a Flying Officer Ferguson, who was in the back. So Flying Officer Ferguson, as part of the crew flying the transatlantic flight back over, carved his name into the side of the Lancaster. So that was removed, and it's now placed on display. And there's the section of the aircraft where Flying Officer Ferguson had carved his name into the Lancaster. So that's there on display in the museum as part of our EE Day and Tiger Force exhibition. We did also find a Chiquita banana sticker, which was on the radio operator's position, but we couldn't ascertain if that was placed there by a crew member or somebody who was visiting the Lancaster. So we just peeled off the Chiquita banana sticker and we threw that out. So starting in January of 2018, the aircraft pieces were brought in. After an assessment, we started cleaning, trying to ascertain what damage to the fuselage, what we needed to start doing on the inside, and really just putting together a complete timeline of how long this whole project was going to take. We were given a mandate of having it completed by April of 2024 by Commander RCAF at the time. So we wanted to make sure that we could meet that timeline. We did notice one of the engines was seized. It was open inside the aircraft, so that entire engine was taken apart, cleaned, reassembled, and now we're happy to say we actually have all four engines are workable engines. So here's some of the work that the restoration team was doing on that. Again, so large areas of corrosion from sitting at the side of the road for years had to be removed, replaced, and put have new panels reinstalled. So again, in the summer of 2018, we're starting to get the assessment underway, and we're actually starting some very good restoration work on the Lancaster. So going back to the original drawings, and we're rebuilding some of the pieces that need to be there, need to be rebuilt, and whether they are made out of aluminum or wood. And you can see Oleana there, who is proudly holding one of the pieces that she's about to rebuild. Again, so some of the air cylinder, the storage, and the wing center spar section was pretty corroded inside. A lot of birds were living in there. We can't count the number of birds' nests that we had to pull out of the aircraft. So there was a lot of debris that we had to pull out and make sure that everything was clean. For those of you interested, that tire right there, that's one of the original tires. It's dated from 1952, and those tires still are able to hold air and are in great shape. The inner tubes, but the starboard one has a very slow leak. So we're looking at having the inner tube replaced. So trying to match the aircraft back up again as it was taken apart, we felt it was best in the workshop that we rebuild as much of the aircraft as we could inside the shop, so that we can start working on it as one whole piece, putting together and fixing any of the connectors. When it was taken apart, we know that the Lancaster is designed to be taken apart, but some of the people who did the taking apart didn't know that. So some of the connectors were cut, and we did have to rebuild some of those. So here's part of the fuselage, which is going back together. So again, going back to the original diagrams for the Lancaster are very important for us when we try to rebuild. From March to August 2020, as we all know, the world shut down, and so did work on the Lancaster. So COVID shut the museum down until August of 2020, when we were able to open. Then we were closed down again and not able to open until the summer of 2021. So the volunteers did lose quite a bit of time on restoration of the Lancaster. Had to come back and redouble their efforts. But like any good timeline, we did manage to put in quite a lot of what we call fudge factor into our timeline, so that we were able to quickly make up the lost time from COVID. So in the summer of 2021, you can see things are starting to take shape. So the sling damage from the bottom has been repaired. Leading edges are starting to be rebuilt. The engine firewall is being restored, and we're starting to do some of the work on the main cockpit part on the outside. One of the things we noticed as we were pulling the aircraft apart was that there was 3 different types of cockpit window configurations for KB882 when it was in service. So there's the wartime variant that everybody sees. There's part with a fairing over it in the 1950s. There was a part where they actually had a longer window that was put in, and that framing was made out of wood. Somewhere along the way, the wood framing had been replaced with copper tubing, which we think was done somewhere post its arrival in Edmundston. So we had to pull all of that apart and rebuild the top window section. Here's the engine that had been taken apart. And here is one of the sections that they finished cleaning and restoring and painting. So the crew has started moving inside to start some of the work on that. But our main priority was to get that showroom ready on the outside first, and then start work on the inside. But again, since they had a little more time on their hands, they've started moving in and doing some of the interior painting of the Lancaster. So the summer or fall of 2022. Again, you can see work is starting to progress a little. It's a little slow. Most of the guys have started working on really just researching what they're doing, where it needs to go before they start replacing some of the pieces. So they wanted to make sure that they had got it right. Here's some of the work on the cockpit, which is happening on the inside. Again. You'll notice that there's quite a bit of holes in the cockpit. All of the instruments had been taken out of KB882, and we're looking to try to get a lot of those instruments back. And if not, we're looking at models for 3D printing some of the aircraft dials that we can place in the aircraft until we can receive the actual dials. So the newest one, off to the paint shop in the fall of 2022. Originally, the timeline was set for us to send it to the paint shop in February of 2023. But seeing the amount of snow that would have been on the ground, it would have been impossible for us to move the Lancaster there. So we had rushed and made an agreement with the paint shop that we could move that in the fall before the snow really started to build up on the ground. So here we are towing that out of our restoration workshop, where it had been sitting now for a few years. Now, when it was sitting there, it did get a little bit of grime and dirt on it. So Mike, our restoration manager, he thought he would just hose that down a little bit just to get some of the grime off before bringing it to the paint shop. And the restoration volunteers were all sitting around watching them and joking. So he thought he would hose them down too, since they were full of opinions and little help when he was doing that. He gave them a good soaking. So heading this to the paint shop, you can see our mule itself is just as old as our Lancaster, but it still pulls planes around. So we're in great shape on that. Some of the challenges we had, if you could see going around that corner, we had a 30-foot clearance around that corner, and the total width of what we were pulling was 29 feet 6 inches. So we had barely 6 inches of clearance to get around that corner. Again, this is on the way from the back of the museum through to the ATES paint shop. And then putting through the ATES paint shop, where again, we had to angle park it so that it would be able to fit into the paint shop. So now that it was there, we had to find out the original paint colors. So again, we go back to the original manuals that we have in the collection of the museum to look through. Now, the late Tony Statue had put together a Rosetta Stone, which did match a lot of these paint numbers up to the Fed standard numbers of today. So we were able to find that, but we did encounter a few different problems. So as we were looking at the paint schemes there in our 1GP134 book, we noticed gray 1-8. So going back to the Government of Canada paint color book, we looked at gray 1-8 and noticed that was the color there that it said in the manual. So we were worried if that was going to be too dark, or did they actually mean gray 1-3 and it was a little bit of a blur on the blueprints. Now looking through several of them, it did say gray 1-8, but we figured that was just too dark of a color for what it should be. And you can see the one right above it, gray 1-3, which is the color that we went with for painting. Now that's kind of a bad light there. It looks a little green, but I assure you it's not that green. There's a little bit better of the color now, which is sitting in the paint shop. So this is the preliminary painting from December in January of December 22, January 2023. So as of last week, we went back to visit in April, and now the team has started masking for some of the letters and markings that are going on. So the ATES group that has been tasked to paint has a little short-staffed, so our museum agreed to augment them with 20 volunteers that would head in for every day. That they would help them with the masking and taping of the aircraft. So we wanted to come down, make sure that everybody that was working on the project was able to meet with the colonel of ATES, and the RCAF chief warrant officer was coming in to have a look. So we thought it would be a great time for us to all get together and have a picture. So again, here's some of the more of the markings that we're putting onto KB882. So we made sure all the black was completed first, and then the red shortly after that, and then we'll start with the rest of the colors. Now, an interesting thing. So to show how much pride ATES is taking in the restoration and painting of the Lancaster, they originally made a vinyl decal of the roundel to apply to the side of the aircraft instead of painting that on. When they put the vinyl decal on there, they noticed the rivet heads were poking through. It was bubbling, and it just didn't really meet their standard. So just after this photo was taken, the roundel was ripped off, and they've proceeded to start painting that by hand. One of the neat things about our restoration workshop is that we have a lot of retired personnel. So the civilian you see there is former Chief Warrant Officer Brake, who was Chief Warrant Officer of ATES, who was there as a volunteer working alongside of his son Sergeant Brake, who is part of the ATES paint shop. So the two of them get to work together in the shop restoring the Lancaster. And here is the crew, or most of the crew there, including myself. And I by no means restore the Lancaster. I'm merely just the guy who writes general ledger numbers and signs the bills for payment as they come in. So that's about as much as my involvement is. So how you can help? I know a lot of you have photos, or you have stories, or you have information. I know a few of you online, specifically Matt and Mark. You guys have provided information and stories about KB882 already. Thank you for that. If anybody has money, we're in desperate need of money for a building to put this in. That will come up in the next couple of slides. Or if you have photos of KB882. Now, the one thing that we've noticed looking through photos, we were trying to figure out if the 408 Squadron crest was on the starboard side of the Lancaster, and we could only find two photos that we have of the starboard side of the Lancaster, showing that everything else is from the port side. So if you have a starboard side photo of Lancaster KB882, those are in short supply. If you have any instruments, cockpit instruments, if you have any dials, switches, buttons, anything that will go inside a Lancaster, we would love to have that. Tax receipts are available if you donate to the museum. So the future, right now, the museum is currently has designed phase 2 or 2-phased addition to the museum. One just to hold the Lancaster right now in the interim, and then a second phase expansion to head after that. We've prepared an order of magnitude estimate and have submitted that to DND as of last year. Total cost right now we're looking at for the Lancaster part of the expansion or phase 1 is about $6.6 to $6.7 million in 2022 costs. So we're expecting that to go up with the cost of construction going up, and we'll be starting a capital campaign project hopefully in September of 2023. Now, does anybody have any questions?
Before we get to questions, I'll just say thank you very much, Kevin. Really interesting presentation. I'll start off with the first question as well. Can you clarify what the AR in the Mark 10 AR Lancaster stands for?
It's aerial reconnaissance. So there was a 44-inch extension on the nose to the aircraft. A few other windows, a bunch of different cameras were put in, and this really went up and was mapping the Arctic. Part of the reconnaissance role, looking for Russians that were around, and really the first group of people looking at Arctic sovereignty.
And if I'm not mistaken, it also kept an eye on Soviet drift stations, right?
Yeah. So one of the interesting stories that we heard from one of the pilots, he said it was a particularly cloudy day. They decided they wanted to circle down to get below the clouds. When they circled down, they actually discovered an ice floe with a Soviet station on it. They discovered that just quite by accident while trying to get out of the clouds. So we've actually had a work of art commissioned showing that, which will be on display as part of the exhibit.
A question here. I just wonder what state was the interior in when you got it? Like, how complete was it, or had it been stripped out? And is it your intention to completely restore the entire interior of the aircraft?
So everything was removed from it when Lancasters were being restored in the 1980s. There was many Lancasters that were had parts, dials, buttons, switches, toggles removed from that, and also just several years of souvenir hunters going in. So the Lancaster itself was almost completely stripped of any parts. Some of the early airport staff did go in and remove some of the instruments and dials, and they put them into boxes in safekeeping, and they've turned those over to the museum. But really, we have about 30% of the required instruments inside, and every one of the cameras are missing. So we do have some of the cameras that are there, but there's a really large tri-met camera which sat in the belly, and that's a huge one that I'm not sure we're ever going to be able to make. So we may not be able to restore that part of it, but our hope is to get that as restored on the inside as our Halifax is, which means it will look like it's still flying.